And now, the best 60-ish seconds of your week. This week, America mourns the loss of Bart Starr, one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, some would say the greatest. He was the Tom Brady of his era, only he didn't cheat. A gentleman to the final days, Bart Starr, may he rest in peace, and may light perpetual shine upon him. And this week, the world will observe the 75th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. Operation Overlord, codenamed Operation Neptune, commonly called D-Day. It was the largest amphibious assault in the history of the world and freed Europe ultimately from Nazi oppression. The Normandy invasion broke down Hitler's Atlantic Wall, which he had fortified through Field Marshal Rommel that he had placed in charge there. 150,000 plus Allied troops stormed the beach on June the 6th and ultimately marched across Europe to Berlin to free the world from Nazi oppression. I'm particularly touched by the D-Day observances because I've been privileged to be a part of a couple of them. The 40th with President Ronald Reagan and his famous Pont de Hoc speech where he talked about the boys there, the men who scaled the cliffs, who won the war, and who were the champions of liberty. And one of the great speeches of all time, take a moment to read Ronald Reagan's speech on the 40th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. And then I was there for the 50th anniversary as well with President Bill Clinton and the American delegation, because General Giroux, one of my family, was the commanding general officer at D-Day. His 5th Corps was the Big Red One, made famous in a lot of movies, and the fabled 29th Infantry Division, about 35,000 troops at his command, right next door to Lightning Joe Collins and his 7th Corps. You know, the Corps commanders didn't get quite the attention in the Second World War that they did in previous wars, but they're worth taking a look at and maybe reading a moment about. General Eisenhower's speech to the troops prior to their departure for the Normandy beaches is the most famous, but I personally am a little fond of Giroux's. He said a couple of things. He said, "You have been selected by the Supreme Allied Command to undertake the most important military operation in the history of the world." Think about how that sunk into young men. But he concluded very simply by saying that freedom-loving nations everywhere would hail their victory and that they fought on God's side and could not fail. Thank God he was right. So as we take a look back this June the 6th to what happened 75 years ago and say a word of thanks and a prayer of gratitude to all of those who sacrificed so much there and then, we can all be very, very proud of what the American troops did on Utah and Omaha beaches. We're going to be giving you a summer reading list as we do every summer. Do that a little bit later, but if you want to take a look at 2 really good books about D-Day, the first I would recommend is the primordial work Stephen Ambrose's D-Day, but there's also Joe Balakowski's Omaha Beach, available from Stackpole Books. Both of those great reads. You might want to take a look at them this week especially. And we got the statement, I won't call it a press conference, from Robert Mueller this week. And the Democrats, you know, have a lot to chomp about now with respect to impeachment and what he said there. It wasn't a press conference. He wouldn't even take questions, for crying out loud. But the 10-minute or so speech that he gave there, really you have to ask what it added to the discussion, because basically all that he said was contained in the Mueller report, and he constantly kept coming back to the report speaks for itself, the report speaks for itself. Well, if it does, let it do so. It's going to be very interesting to see whether Mueller gets dragged in front of Congress to answer a lot of other questions. It's also going to be interesting to see whether the charges now being brought by many Republican lawyers about whether or not Mueller stepped on an ABA rule about extrajudicial comments from prosecutors about uncharged individual comes into play. But this much almost certainly is. The declassification of those documents that President Trump ordered last week is going to reveal ultimately the predicate for all of this. And therein, I believe, will be some very, very embarrassing moments for the Obama administration, his Justice Department, his FBI. Remember, the folks weren't real happy about James Comey on the other side either, after what he did during the 2016 campaign. So a lot, unfortunately, left to discuss here. But impeachment remains the big word. The problem for the Democrats is the American people don't want it. Recent poll shows that over 90% of Republicans are opposed. That may not be that big of a shock, except the margin should be. The magnitude of that number is pretty expansive. But where it really gets tough for the Democrats is that independents, although not by as big a margin, are opposed to impeachment. Roughly a 10-point bulge there. And among Democrats, self-identifying Democrats, the response to impeachment is not overwhelming at all. Literally 25% are opposed. And even those that support impeachment aren't all that enthusiastic about it, at least not many of them. So it's a political problem for the Democrats. Ultimately, they're not going to get the votes in the Senate to remove President Trump from office. And even if they did, they'd have to say President Pence. So we'll see how all that works out. There's much to come. I want to mention just one thing about Joe Biden's candidacy, because it is in its ascendancy. He's done very, very well since he announced. And, you know, a lot of folks are wondering whether he might ultimately be the nominee. But my friends in Delaware, several of them, and as you know, Delaware is a pretty closely knit group, shall we say, are telling me that there is a soft underbelly to the Biden campaign, and it is the business dealings and personal life of his son, Hunter. Stay tuned. There apparently are a lot of stories that are percolating and will come to the surface about Hunter Biden over the course of the next couple of weeks. So please take a moment to observe June the 6th, the 75th anniversary of D-Day. Have a great week, because for now, that is the best 60-ish seconds of your week.